How are you tonight? I am incredibly honored to be with you here tonight. When John called to see if I would be able to join you, I was thrilled to death. We're going to have a very interesting evening, I think. The size of the group lends itself more to a sharing model than a lecture model. So if I have your permission, what I would like to do tonight is have a dialogue with you. Everything that we've done in the project is based on the concept that we are a wisdom community, that we take seriously what Paul told us, that we have all the gifts that we need to carry forth the work of God. And that means that in this room, collectively, we have what we need to know, and with our brothers and sisters in parish ministry and those caring for parishes across the country. So all of our work, in fact, none of our work involved bringing in authorities to tell people how to do that, and that includes tonight. I am here to share with you the results of the research. You are the authorities on how to pastor, how to staff, how to care for God's people in your own places. So what I would like to do, and when I get going, you know, I just tell everybody I have an off switch and you're allowed to push it. Because what we've learned has been so intriguing and so fascinating. But if you have a question or a comment or it just really stirs something in your heart to share, let's do that in the moment rather than waiting to the end, because you might lose it, and I don't want to lose any of that richness. I learn every minute that I'm in front of a group, and you never know what I'm going to take to the next group. So with that as introduction, John actually did the hardest part of my work, is telling you about these 6 organizations. You know, and I count them out from my fingers so I don't forget anybody. But it has been an incredible partnership of both lay and ordained, of people with different ministries, human resources or personnel ministry, young adult ministry, pastoral planners coming together with those that pastor, those that staff parish work. So it's been really an incredible experience of people coming together. And what these partners decided was this whole project, the Emerging Models of Pastoral Leadership project, is rooted and funded by a very large and generous grant from the Lilly Endowment as part of a larger program called Sustaining Pastoral Excellence. And so they decided that since Lilly was so generous with us, we in turn choose to be generous with the church. And all of the research, as it becomes available, even before it's been analyzed, is available on the website. There are hundreds and hundreds of pages not on the website behind what's there, thousands on the website. There for anybody that wants to use them for your own research, for your own theological or academic study. This is a gift that we would like to be available to the entire church. And so in your handouts you'll notice, but the website is www.emergingmodels.org. And I do invite you to go when you have an afternoon and can skip around the documents, because there's a great deal there. But I'm going to give you the overview tonight of what's there. When we started this project, we really thought we were going out to look at what is emerging in the way of parish structures. And we did find that. We found that the look and feel of parishes is changing. It's changing so much that now I always use the word paradigm shift when I talk. The change is so deep, so broad, so complete across the country that the parishes that we grew up in, a couple of you might be close to my age, so it's not the parish we grew up in. How many of you, first of all, are in parish ministry? Let me see who we've got here. Okay, academic people? Peace and Justice Ministries? One, okay. What other ministries are represented? Parish Council, wonderful. Parish Council, Youth Ministry, over here, okay. All right. Make sure I tell you about the survey we did with young people. It's fascinating. Okay. All right. Think about the parish that you grew up in. Is it like the parish where you now minister or pray and belong to? No, it is not. And we each know our own experience. I'm here to tell you that is the collective experience in this country. For some of you, as I talk tonight, you're going to have heard this. Those of you that are saying to yourself, I know this, I invite you to take a step backwards and stand with me and see if we can discern together the big picture. And to me, the big picture is what the Spirit is inviting us to right now. That's where I have moved in my exploration of the material, and I find it intriguing. But what happened was we didn't just find changing parish structures. We also found that eventually, as we report out the findings of this 5-year study, we also have to talk about the changing models of parish leadership. So I'm going to talk about this a good deal tonight. Parish leadership, the roles of all of the leaders in the parish are evolving. Those also are not like they were when we were youngsters. But then there was a third way we found that we had to talk about the findings, and that was models of best practices. And if I stood here right now without any of the preparation and named the best practices for you, you'd know them. You know them, but we are being really creative in the way that we are reappropriating them in these changing structures that we find ourselves. So when we talk about the project, then we're going to talk about these 3 areas. I believe that the Spirit is inviting us into an unanticipated future. I believe that where we are today is, in fact, this picture isn't in your paper. Not all of the slides will be in your notes, but I won't let you get lost. What we are seeing now is, I believe, the result of the movement of our 2,000-year tradition and very much what we wanted to see out of Vatican II, out of the documents of Vatican II. It's just that when they were written, we just didn't know what it was going to look like in practice. So what I'm here to talk about is what I think it's looking like in practice. But chief among the findings for me personally is a deep-seated belief that the Spirit is active and alive, and that there is a deep invitation to us as we move into this change. And I'm going to share with you some of my thoughts about that, because I think if we can try to see with the eyes of Spirit, we're going to see something very exciting happening. Now, this is Boston. Church isn't real exciting in Boston right now all the time. That's shared by people across the country. But in fact, I think something very exciting is happening. So we're going to talk about that tonight. Now, this is where things are going to get kind of dicey. When I thought about tonight, I changed my presentation. So if you will turn to page 6, you'll find the first. I decided that I wanted to talk about the parish structures first. And they start, your slides start there on page 6. So I'm going to talk about, as I do each of the 3 sections that I named, is talk about the reality and talk about the research, and then we'll talk a little bit about where I think Spirit is leading us in this. So what is our reality in 2007? 64.4 million Catholics, depending on what your source is. Some sources say 67, some say 69. It's a big number in this country of the Catholics. Over 18,000 parishes. That has grown regularly in this country. Just the last couple of years, it's leveled out or dropped down a little bit, and we know why, because in the Northeast, parishes are merging, clustering, closing. Not true in other parts of the country. 17% of the parishes in this country do not have a resident pastor. Are there parishes in your diocese that don't have a resident pastor? Okay. All right, you're right in there. Of those, nearly 500, and that number is currently dropping a little bit, are what we call Canon 517.2 parishes. And I'm going to talk about those a little more in depth in a little bit. Canon 517.2 is a provision in the law that allows a bishop to install a deacon, religious, or lay person to provide the pastoral leadership of a parish. It's done so under the supervision of a priest supervisor or a priest moderator. And the sacramental ministry is provided by a priest, also a sacramental minister. Neither of those priests would be resident, although occasionally you have a layperson leading a parish and an associate pastor or vicar that's there in the parish. But usually there's not a resident priest. That's about 4% of our parishes. That means about 13% of them just simply don't have someone that's technically the pastor at the parish. People always like to remind you only a third of those tend to be actively Catholic. Well, all right. But what's really interesting, do you know that 75% of the Catholics in this country don't believe that you have to go to Mass to be a really good Catholic? So what does that call us to? Do we just not count them because they don't come to Mass regularly? Or are we called to minister to them as the baptized? Question.
Would the priests in those 500 parishes be religious or you don't have
Well, technically there's no priest in the parish. Now the priests that come in to minister can be either diocesan or religious. And I will get into that in a little more depth, which they are. A lot of these parishes have been clustered together under one pastor. In every diocese in this country, many, if not most of our parishes have multiple language bases. How many of your parishes have multiple language bases? Whoa, not that many hands. How many? 3. How many? It's the same parish. 2? 4, all right. 2. Do you know that every Sunday in the Diocese of Los Angeles they claim upwards of 75 different language bases? Mass is said in over 75 different languages every Sunday. Newark, they claim over 65 different languages every Sunday. The primary change, because we are in the midst of the latest and greatest wave of immigration, and it is largely Spanish-speaking. So there is pretty much every parish that has Spanish-speaking people in it. If it isn't your parish, it's coming to a theater near you. It is simply true everywhere. This was one of the greatest realizations for me. I thought it was maybe coastal, maybe California, southern part of the country. There is no diocese that is not multicultural, culturally diverse in this country, which poses some very interesting questions for us as pastoral leaders. How do you minister to people in the language of their heart? And do they not have a right to be ministered to in those really tender moments in the language of their heart? How do you call forth leadership from different cultures? Every culture. You do not call forth leadership from a Vietnamese community the same way you do from a Laotian community. And the challenges, I remember meeting one woman who said, oh, we have 5 different languages in our parish, and my DRE speaks 2 languages. Of course, the second one is Norwegian, and that's not a lot of help. So, anybody would like to guess the diocese with the largest average parish size? Or just give me the state. I won't even pin you to a diocese. Not Texas. California. Diocese of Orange. All right, get a number in your head. Number of individuals, number of people, average parish size. Please? No, it is California. Oh, okay, not per parish. How many average in each parish? Upwards of that. 20,000 people is the average parish size in the Diocese of Orange. Now, there are parishes, and certainly in this part of the country, that are larger than that, but not average every parish. The ratio of priests to parishioners in the Diocese of Orange, 1 to 18,000. And of course, that's not counting those that you don't count, like the extra legals and so forth. All right? The world is changing. We discovered in the process, we're probably going to describe 7 different models of parish structures. We're still refining how we want to describe them in the big picture, but infinite variations on those models. If I could tell you one thing that's true everywhere about the different kinds of models and the way people put it together is people have become creative in meeting local needs. So if there is a single emerging structure, it is one that matches the needs for this community in this place in this time. But what we have found is that this diversity is driven by economics, geography, and demographics. So how many people, how many different cultures are in your parish? Are you rural? Are you city? How much money you have? But not driven by an ecclesiology, which, you know, is sort of the first place we go because we're all church people. But that really is not what we're finding. And not driven by diocesan planning. I really apologize to all of you that work for the diocese. Never came up. We talked to 1,000 people. Never came up. You just didn't. Multiple parish pastoring is the end phrase. This was probably the hot button topic that we encountered across the country. We have some pastors in here, I suspect. Any of you pastor multiple parishes? How many parishes do you have? 2. Here in Boston? Are they neighboring parishes or across town or 2 different communities? Did I see another hand? Yes. 2 former parishes, but 2 worship sites? Okay. Is anybody in a parish that shares a pastor? Yes. 3 that are merging into 1. Okay. Okay. Do you know that nearly half of the parishes in this country share their pastor with at least one other parish or mission? Nearly half of the parishes in this country. Now, the implications of this are huge. And what we found is that fewer than 10 dioceses provide any formal training for the men that are taking on this role of pastoring multiple parishes. Well, you're a pastor. You should know how to do it. You know, just take another parish or 2. The greatest number of parishes I heard assigned to one man, and it might be greater, but just that I know about, so guess. 9. The shortest time from ordination to pastoring multiple parishes. Young man went from ordination to pastoring 3 rural parishes and told that he had 6 months to merge them. That was kind, wasn't it? Okay. The priests in the diocese up in the Pacific Northwest have set down the law. They have told their bishops, we will not pastor more than 5 parishes. Just won't do it. And your experience here in the larger areas of pastoring them close together is not the experience in the more rural areas. Met one priest who is pastoring 6 parishes that cover 600 square miles. I talked to a religious order priest who was 82 and wanted to come to one of our gatherings, but he had a heart problem and he was afraid his doctor would be angry at him. Gee. And so he didn't come, but he explained to me in the phone call that he's pastoring 3 parishes that are no less than 80 miles apart, each of them. Met a young man in Nebraska, about 40, which for a priest is a young man, and he's pastoring 2 clusters of 3 parishes each. But the clusters are so far apart that he has to have 2 residences. So from Sunday through Wednesday morning, he lives and works with one cluster. From Wednesday afternoon till Saturday night, he goes and lives in the other cluster. Think about this. He was at his wit's end. He said, do you know, just to make sure you have the clothes and the computer and the books where you need them, when you need them, from a very rural diocese that doesn't have ministry training, lay ministry training programs, whether diocesan or academic. And so he was really working on developing parishioners for the different ministries, because he said, I'm ready to quit. He hasn't. He's working it out. But if you can imagine that. Met another priest who's in California, really high energy guy, sort of ADD kind of guy. And I have two parishes, one with 3,500 families, one with 1,500 families. So what's the big deal? So they share a DRE, and I don't have any other staff, and I'm going, oh, honey, wait till you're 60. Okay. All right, so this really is, and we've done a lot of research with this. A lot of it's on the website. But I'll give you this little intriguing clue. We have found that if you're doing this and you need some training, read the materials designed for blended families. You got it, right? Now, I'm going to grossly exaggerate here just to make the point. Daddy gets to live with you. Well, Daddy likes us better because his furniture's here. Well, you get him on Sundays, but we get him on Saturday nights. Now, it's a gross exaggeration, but those dynamics are there. And so pastors are telling us they have found some really good resources studying those materials. This sort of is the reality. This model is going to continue to increase. It's the number one choice of dioceses to work with pastor shortages. Any questions about that model before I... Yes?
I was wondering when you said to look to the literature for blended family. I wonder if there was any accidental conversation, because
They certainly have. There may be, and I don't know about it. But one of the differences, their congregations are a good deal smaller generally, although not necessarily the rural ones. I don't know if there has been. And what we have not studied yet, but if we are able to continue our work, there's an enormous impact on the parish staffs, so the lay ecclesial ministers. And I'm going to talk real specifically about that in a little bit, but this does not just affect the pastors. It's just that that's all we've studied so far. This I have found totally intriguing. Now, part of what we're all wondering is how do we make parishes more vital and alive? This is what both lay and ordained have told us. Where parishes are spiritually alive, they're welcoming Eucharistic communities. Now, I want to break that down a little bit because those seem like sort of duh words, but they're deeper than that. Welcoming, this is in the scriptural sense of being radically welcoming to the stranger. And if you go back to one of the sources trying to research this, Isaiah 58, which is the fast that I ask of you is not foregoing food, The fast that I ask for you is welcoming the stranger, and on. It's that radical welcoming, whether it's people of diverse cultures, young adults are begging us to recognize their presence and do more with them in our parishes, whether it's the out crowd or however the stranger gets defined in your parish. Those that tell us their parishes are spiritually vital and alive tell us in so many words that they are welcoming communities. Eucharistic. Completely unscripted through the entire course of the project. This is what everybody came back to. We as pastoral leaders are so totally centered in our self-identity as a Eucharistic people. This is core to who we are. Now, I first began hearing this as we went out, because this wasn't one of our questions, are you Eucharistic people? Was the woman religious from Idaho who said, how often do you have to have a Eucharistic liturgy to be a Eucharistic people? Is once a month enough? Once a month in some parts of this country. Many places have given up daily liturgies. Many places have given up Sunday liturgies in favor of Saturday night liturgies. Other places provide liturgical opportunities on Wednesday night when there's nothing available on the weekend. An image that was recently given me was if in the 50s we were at high tide with the easy and ready availability of Eucharist, the Eucharistic liturgy in this country, that tide is now ebbing. Period. Now, many of us grew up, you went to Mass every morning and all of that. Not in most parts of this country anymore. Communities. It's not just the local community, it's not just the faith community, it's the depth of understanding from Vatican II of what communio means. So that real sense of communio is what people talk about, the language that they use. So, welcoming Eucharistic communities. Yes?
There are places in Queensland where there's no church, there's a hall. And on the first week the Catholic priest comes. The next week the Anglican or Episcopalian priest is there. The United Church comes to town the week after that. And on the fourth week, no one.
Wow. Wow. And we are moving towards that. Mm-hmm. They gather anyway. So we're beginning to understand what it means to be a Eucharistic people, broader than the reception of the sacrament at the liturgy. We are. And that is actually one of the 7 models that we're talking about, are lay-led churches that have no staff and no resident pastor, where the community itself is coming together and keeping the community going. Yes?
The research showing those parishes that they do a lot of the
Yes, and I'm going to talk about. Was going to talk about that, but yes, absolutely, that's one of the characteristics. Mm-hmm. Now, this is equally interesting. This is what they told us when they're saying that their parish is not spiritually alive. These 3 things come up all the time: a dysfunctional pastor and/or staff. And dysfunctional in any way you want to think about that, whether it's alcoholic abuse or can't get along, I mean, any sense of that word. And it could be confined to infighting between pastor and staff or between staff members. But when that happens, it literally affects the spiritual life of the parish. We need to know that. We do. What we do matters. And so we need to be doing our own self-care. We need to be doing spiritual direction, retreats, reading, professional activities. You're here tonight. This is terrific. Where are the other 3,000 people that could be here tonight? Maybe they're finding it someplace else, but we need to do that because it matters, not just for ourselves. It affects the spiritual life of our community. You want to know how to make your community more spiritually alive? Tend to your own garden. We have been told this over and over again. People have told us that there are communities where the parishioners are unwilling to grow. That's true. That can happen. There could be a lot of reasons for it. And so this is when you are called on to be prophetic, I think. And that is, of all the marks that we tested, one of the hardest for us to deal with is how, in God's name, do you be prophetic? They're not willing to change. They might stay in their cliques. It's defined in a lot of different ways. And the last one is parish trauma. So this is a community trauma, not an individual trauma. It might be a child was murdered from the school, the pastor was pulled, the parishes are being merged. Anything that collectively impacts the parish. During the time of that trauma, it's difficult to be spiritually vital and alive. So what this is saying to me is, if you are with a parish that's going through this, you have to tend to the grief. And grief has all the stages that we all know: bargaining and anger and sadness, and the many manifestations that come with that. And we don't like to do that, But we have to. And the reason that we have to is so that we can, again, become a spiritually vital community. This makes sense, you know, when you think about it. It would be true in a family, it would be true in any system. It certainly is true in a parish. I'd like to say there's more spiritually alive than there's not. I don't have any hard data, but I think we have plenty that aren't. I don't want to give it a number. I want to stick with what I know. All right. This is what people told us the parish of the future is going to look like. The seeds of the parish future are happening today. So these are things that you want to be tending to in your parishes now. Oops, I went one too many, I think. Well, wait a minute. There we go. Vibrant and welcoming small faith-based communities. That whole small faith-based community movement, which I thought sort of went by the roadside, no, and it's very, very much alive. It's alive where you have small communities that don't have much of a pastoral presence. It's also alive in the mega churches. The way mega churches are making things happen is creating these faith-based communities within the church. Met a young man in mid-30s, a dad, full-time job, who was the chair of the parish council. And he explained, it's a parish out here, 5,000 families. And the parish council, and there's the parish council and 9 commissions. And each of the commissions has 2 members of the council that are liaisons to the commission. Now, this young man was on fire about his parish and what they were doing. And what he told us was, we thought we were the experts and we were going to go and tell the commissions what to do because we were on the council. He said, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. We need to go to listen, to be present, to be collaborative. And he went on to beautifully describe the meaning of collaborative from his view as a counselor in that parish. It was really quite a moment. And actually, the first book that's going to come out from the project is a book of stories, and this story is one of the stories that's in it. How do you get people invested and excited? People need a place where they're not anonymous. People need a place where their pastoral needs are met. Folks, we can't do it. 1 to 18,000 people? But it can happen in those small faith-based communities. And that's why it's really important to be nurturing those. Total ministering communities with increased lay leadership. Across the board, your ordained and lay peers across the country are telling us the parish of the future is going to have increased lay leadership. That's lay staff, certainly, but they're really talking more about the parishioners themselves. We have found that the parishes, this was a thing that people wondered about. We seem to have some statistical evidence now that parishes that have lots going on, lots of ministries going on, and this is irrelevant of size, but lots of ministries going on, lots of involvement of the parishioners in those ministries, and lots of training and preparation of the parishioners for those ministries. C are the ones that self-identify as more vitally alive. The parishes that tell us they're not vitally alive don't tell us they have a lot of ministries going on. And most of these ministries do not require money. Bereavement groups and catechetical things and support for divorced families and peace and justice. I mean, all the things that we know about. There was a parish down in New Orleans that was known for calling forth the ministry of parishioners before Katrina. But when Katrina hit, most of their parishioners lost their homes and were scattered. Afterwards, they found their parishioners, they went looking in 22 different states. The church was damaged, the homes were damaged. People began coming back, they began calling people back. They stayed in touch with them by email and so forth. The community, as it regathered, said, we're going to repair the church first. And they did. And in the process of doing that, the church not only became more real and vital for parishioners, it became a social center. It became a point of light in that whole community, Catholic or otherwise, which I think is incredibly wonderful. You know, we want to know, does it make a difference that our parish is in this neighborhood? This is a case where it is. Well, what they did was they began to realize that the ministries that were needed were different than the ministries that were needed before Katrina. They now talk about the ministries of demolding and the ministry of sheetrocking. Translate that, the ministry of building the community back up. So they were able to shift and not be so rooted in there's only one way to do it. The other thing that we discovered was people talk a lot about getting people involved in the parish. Almost nobody talks about how are we supporting people in their lives. How are we supporting their ministry in their homes and in their workplaces? Is that not where laity are called to take the good news of the kingdom, is out into the world? But we as pastoral leaders don't talk about that. Maybe they think about it back home, but they just didn't talk about it very much. It's how do we get them into our programs? How do we get them on campus to do things? Which is really important, I get that. But just really think about how are you supporting your parishioners in their lives, their day-to-day lives. Right, that's what total ministry in communities means. Mission focused. Who asked me that question? Here it is. Mission focused, justice-oriented communities. It was delightful to me that it seems that that sense of peace and justice is part of the fabric of people that are in pastoral leadership. It's who we are. It's there. Oh, I'm going all kinds of places. I'm sorry. Let's see. Okay. It's part of who we are. And in the world that we're moving into, and people have named all kinds of things, whether it's culturally diverse, whether us boomers getting on in age, whatever it is, more and more justice work is going to be required of us. And we have this. This is part of who we are. But this will be very much a part of the community of the future. Well, we've been talking about this, inclusive of diverse forms of leadership in peoples and changing structures. Yes? Okay? All right. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Almost like a vice principal, an assistant to the pastor that really supports parish life in a sense that they need today because there's a young priest in many of these churches.
And that does happen. Mm-hmm. And there's actually was in a diocese where this is a regular ministry with a name. It's a great name. But it's basically the person responsible for calling forth parishioners. I'm sorry, the name escapes me. But yes, people do pay attention to that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Questions? Yes?
We're talking about leadership. What is happening with the priestly ministry at the same time?
I'm going to tell you about that because it's real important and it's actually good news. So, yes, it's really good news. Can you give me 5 minutes? Okay. Other question that I can answer now? Okay. There's a marvelous piece by Carl Rahner, if you want to go look it up, on the spirituality of parish. But he talks about as a dynamic event. I think we get locked in the parish that's institutional, that's structural, that has committees and councils. And I think that sometimes we forget that the real life of the parish is dynamic. It is the dynamic experience of Christ being present in the world and in our lives. And I think part of the change that's happening is we're becoming more organic. We're becoming more dynamic as we understand ourselves as parish. So I invite you to think about, we talk more about what parish is than why we have parish. We have parish to make the Christ event alive and real in people's lives. And we forget that sometimes. Oops, okay. Now you can go back to the beginning of the packet. Okay, all right, here's your question now. Who are the people that are doing this? Who are the leaders? Who are the people that are making parish come alive? Again, 64 million Catholics, 18,000 parishes. The greatest untapped resource I think that we have, the greatest untapped leadership resource that we have are the parishioners, are the baptized. I mean, when you think about it, and you think about who does the ministry in the parish, who's the first person you think about? Is it the parishioner? Probably not. It's probably the pastor or the staff. And when there were a series of questions that we asked people to answer, and one of them was, what is the leadership role of the parishioner? I would say fewer than half of the people could answer that question in any behavioral way. And yet, if you think about our parish communities, the reality is that they do and need and must provide leadership. And if you think about leadership as the person that helps the community move through change, it may or may not be the person that has the authority to do so. So the person with authority is the one installed or hired to do so. Maybe the one that's been made the head of the council. But we're all called to leadership. And so I think that one of the profound things that's happening in parish today is that this whole baptismal call to discipleship is growing. And that this is the good news inside of all the changes. This is how we're going to survive, if we're going to survive with parish structures as we know them, is really beginning to understand and call forth the discipleship of all the baptized. This is tough. None of us grew up thinking this way. This is an enormous paradigm shift. What people told us was that where the leadership of, thank you, where, the leadership of parishioners, where they're active and engaged, they're engaged in the future visioning of the parish. Just as an aside, those people that came from parishes that do strategic planning were more energized, this is just an observation, I can't prove it with numbers, were more energized and excited than the people that didn't. Now, planning doesn't real high on my list usually, but this was irrefutable. So if you're taking your community through strategic planning processes that involve your parishioners. Lay-led ministries, often with training and evaluation, I was telling you about an example of that. Developing new ministries, especially outreach. It's interesting where we heard people say, the parishioners came and asked us if we could do this, so we tried it. Versus the ones that say, some version of, I know best and that wasn't going to work in our parish. Now, maybe that's right, maybe it's wrong. This is not a judgment statement, but it's interesting that that's the different kind of language that we heard used. So think about your parishes when people come to you with new ideas. That means they're active and engaged. And how do you treat that? And integral parish council structures, absolutely. You have to have those. They also told us where the parishioners were not engaged, these are the things that came up. Lack of empowerment. They simply weren't being called forth. Dominance by some parishioners. The number's cold. Everybody has it down. What percentage of the parishioners in your parish are the ones that are involved? 2. 4 was higher. The number I had in mind was higher. 20% is the number I heard a lot. Well, 20% of them are involved, throughout the parish life. Well, what about the other 80, So sometimes, it's those parishioners that are in there and have those rules and they aren't going to let go. I remember one woman that was a parish life director who said, you know, we just had to wait till they died off, and we did have 50 funerals this year. I don't recommend that as an option. Expectation that the pastor must be a leader. You know, we've got to move away from this. Well, you're the pastor, you do it. You're the pastoral associate, you do it. You know, why should we do it? You're the one that gets paid, or you're the one the bishop put in here to do this. It's your job. You know what? We have to have the courage to say, it's not our job. And you know what? If you don't do it, maybe it won't get done. And if it wasn't that important, ooh, this is that prophetic piece that's really tough. Was talking with the pastor just this week about this. And it's his conviction, I don't know whether this is self-serving or not, but he does have 5 parishes, that he should have time where he's not busy. But this is why. This is why. And then lack of a role for the parish pastoral council. Okay, so think about how involved the councils are. Yes?
Run into very often situations where the expectation was that the paid staff or the sort of professionals in the parish were the ones to be expected to provide the services.
Absolutely. And that expectation came from both sides. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yes? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There really are a lot of resources. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Absolutely. It does all tie together. And when you see it from that perspective, it makes more sense, not disparate things. Story of a woman who, out west, who had a parish that was Spanish-speaking and English-speaking, and it was essentially 2 communities. They really did not mix. And she started doing the Ignatian exercises with the Spanish-speaking community. And as a result of doing the Ignatian exercises, that community adopted a logging camp up in the mountains that was extraordinarily poor. They were immigrants, and so they adopted them. They fed them and they clothed them. But they found out pretty quickly this was very expensive, and half the parish just couldn't afford this particular ministry. You know what they did? Their kids heard them talking over the dinner table about what are we going to do? And in youth group, we're talking to the English-speaking kids about this, who went home and told mom and dad. And mom and dad heard this, well, of course we can all be involved in this. And through that process, that community came together. Now, that's the nicest story about Ignatian exercises I've ever heard. It makes it real. It brings it to life. So it's rooted where it needs to be rooted, in prayer and gospel and the story of Jesus. But it comes together. And it wasn't dependent on the adults. It wasn't dependent on the adults. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to answer your question about the staff. Currently, there's over 31,000 lay ecclesial ministers employed at least half-time in the parishes of this country. 31,000. You can add another 10,000 if you include diocesan ministry. And then if you include, that does not include anybody teaching in the school. So that number would increase, or in agencies like Catholic Charities and other agencies. But in their parishes, 31,000 plus. Currently, 63,000 plus women religious. Do you know that I've been tracking these numbers since the year 2000. The CARA website has these numbers on it. The number of women religious in this country has dropped 13,000 in the last 7 years. Number of men religious, 500. A group that is actually growing in this country are the deacons. This seems to be something the bishops have found, and there are more and more deacon formation programs. It's a very rapidly growing number. The average age of lay ecclesial ministers is in their mid-50s. If you count just the If you count just the, if you add in the religious, that number goes up into the low 60s because that is an older population. More than 75% of the deacons are over the age of 60. So this is not the youthful ministry. And when we talk to young adults about it, they said, oh yeah, deacons, that's what those old guys do, right? They're really nice. Well, actually, deacons do a lot more than that. Usually when I talk about the parish staff, I talk about lay ecclesial ministers because they are predominant. Sometimes deacons are involved in the staff. I do not think we understand the role of the deacon in the parish. I personally believe there is one and it's profound, but I don't think we get it. So we don't have a theology for it, and so it's pretty much at the whim of the pastor. Do you have deacons here? Okay. So from one parish to another, their role will be different. If the deacon has the role of a DRE or a pastoral associate, they are otherwise trained and qualified and competent to do that. I mean, that's not just because they're deacons, it's because they are appropriately prepared for those roles. All right. I want you to listen carefully to the words I'm going to use when I talk about the role of the parish staff, because it's going to be very different than the way I'm going to talk about the role of the pastor. And this is something that I wouldn't have understood until we started doing this work, because we think that they're the same, that, you know, this is a little threatening and so on. Actually, they play a very different role, one from another, in the parish. I'll come back to that one. They have told us, both lay and ordained, that the work of the parish staff is the pastoral work of the parish. We're finding that lay ecclesial ministers are becoming generalists. While they come in and need to be prepared for a specific ministry, whether it's the Christian education or pastoral work or youth ministry. In fact, they are doing much of the pastoral work in the parish. Why? Because the pastor might be having 2 other parishes. They might be the only pastoral presence on site. They are responsible for the day-to-day running of the parish. Planning, organizing, implementing programs. That's largely the staff's responsibility. Calling forth and facilitating the gifts of the community. So the parish staff very much does this. So that's very much their role. What pastors, I think, are beginning to understand, and I don't think we started thinking about yet as parish staffs, is just what you were talking about before. Their role is less and less to do the ministry, and more to call forth the ministry of the parishioners. I think pastors are getting that. Lay staffs have to get that as well. And that's really hard because all of us came into this work because we have ministerial hearts. But actually the role is calling us to do something differently. Questions? All right, what they told us was, when you have a parish staff, where this is done well, you have collaborative team atmosphere and strong leadership roles. Collaboration is one of those words that I'm a little leery of saying in public because it's kind of scary and a lot of people don't like it. And yet, across the board, one of the most requested pieces of information has been, how do you collaborate? How do you do it? Because the truth is, this is real. This is real. This is what it's at. You've got a pastor and a staff working together. How do you work together? Almost every gathering, we had a team of a pastor and a female staff person talk about how they've worked together. I mean, people just sat on the edge of their chairs. This is so important for us to understand. And where it's done well, and I think we don't really understand what collaborative means. It's not, I do your work and you do my work and we all do all our work together. That's not what it means. It's where we work together is to create a shared vision for what we are about in this place. Who does what in this place? Then I go do what I do, you go do what you do. Our tasks are unique to us, but when we work out of a shared vision of what we're about in this community. That's what collaboration means. Yes.
Also, in terms of quality and collaborative ministry, it's a shared ministry of people.
Right.
Not one of
Right. And it's appreciation of the equality of gifts. So it involves a calling forth of the gifts. So you do what you do well and I do what I do well. And we recognize that in each other. Well, people put that together as many ways as there are people. There are some places where the pastor is the final say, period. There's others where they tell us that they work very hard to provide a united front to the community. Don't laugh. and so, because they've done their homework, and they've done the shared visioning behind the scenes, when a parishioner comes up to sister and says, can this happen, and doesn't like the answer, and then goes over here to father, father already knows what the answer was and is going to stand behind sister, and vice versa. And we've heard lots of descriptions of that kind of way that people do the decision making. So it's sort of unique to the community how that's going to play out. Now they also told us where the parish staff doesn't feel like things are working very well. There's weak team dynamics. There's a lot of silo ministry going on. Do you know what I mean when I say silo ministry? You know what a silo is on a farm. You know, everything's stored in this one independent structure. So in this, I found almost more in the larger communities that have large staffs. You go do your thing, don't bother me. As long as you get your work done, I don't care when you come and go. I just want to see the work done. Don't bother me with questions. People don't talk to each other. Now, I have to tell you this. I was out in Montana, and I was talking about silo ministry, and the room just went nuts. I'm going, no, it's not that bad. And somebody finally said, do you know what we have in Montana? Silos with missiles in them. That's where we store them. Everybody's farm has them. You know, they're dug down in the ground. And my only response was, and do you want them working collaboratively or not? So if you need an image, there's one for you. Obviously, the controlling leadership style of the pastor. You know, it really takes a lot of grace not to do that. It is harder sometimes to do group decision-making and consensus when you just know you know the right answer. We all get there sometimes. I don't care what our role is, whether you're pastor, whether you're staff. But that doesn't lend to good ministry, and it doesn't lend to good leadership, and it does not lend to a spiritual parish. And yeah, it's a lot harder the other way, but if you do it the other way, everybody's invested. And of course, they told us lack of resources is a problem. Yes?
Is that apparent resources?
Probably both. Yes?
Many parishes and studies, the reason why they're not strong is lack of financial resources.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that there are not other resources, but I think we're getting to the point where many parishes probably have to retrench even more.
Mm-hmm.
Resources,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's some real fixed costs that you have, like buildings and so forth, and upkeep. I find it hard to understand parishes that can't afford lay ministers. And I say, well, how many parishioners do you have? Thinking it's 500 or something. Well, we have 10,000. Okay, so, but that is real, and if that's your case, then that's your case. So how do you do it? Oh. Wow. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I heard this story, and I don't know if this will help at all. It was from a UCC pastor, United Church of Christ pastor, who was in a very poor inner city church. and was mostly supported by their congregation, their boards. And so they brought in somebody to help them figure out because they weren't making it. And he said, use the money that's coming in from outside to pay the rent and the heat. Use the money the parishioners are give and let them see it's going for something exciting, whether it's the mission of the parish or bringing in somebody exciting. So how do we, if we can get people excited about what their money's being spent on? I know another parish that was a very large parish. Pastor, there was a staff of 24, and this is not counting a school. High giving level. A new pastor came in, it was time for rotation with a totally different, good but totally different model of how to pastor and pared the staff down to 2 people. The giving level dropped off 60%. And he couldn't even afford the 2 people. Didn't understand what went wrong because it worked very well where he was before. So there's lots of, how do we let people know what we're doing with their money? I don't know whether that helps or not, but I thought that was very intriguing. I want to go back just for a second to the slide I skipped. If you all have not read or are not familiar with the bishop's document on lay ecclesial ministry, Co-workers in the Vineyard of the Lord, I would really invite you to take time to read that book. In that book, specifically on page 14, in case you want to find it, the bishop said lay ministry is a gift of the Spirit. This is a gift of the Spirit to the church. Now, they didn't use the word vocation in it. That made them nervous. But we do know that more than 80% of lay ministers believe they were called by God to this ministry, which is a vocational call. Yes? No, that's not true. Now, it's been formally voted on. That's true. Has everybody accepted the vote? No, not everybody has accepted the vote. But the Bishops' Conference have formally recognized lay ministry, which is a first step in recognizing a new profession. Ed Hannenberg, who is the theologian that wrote the theology section of this document, although I don't think I know that, recently gave a talk this summer in Collegeville. It's on the Collegeville website. His name is Ed Hannenberg. And looking at all of this, he said, in the history of the church, there have been, since apostolic times, there have been 4 major ministerial waves. The first was the founding of the monastic movement. You know, and if you think about that, that was to house the stranger and the sick and the traveler, which was really some of the reasons the monastery started. So they were ministerial. Rome said, no, we're not doing this. Second was the establishing of the mendicant orders. So what happened was people went out from the monasteries and into the highways and byways. We've got Francis and Benedict and you know all those folks, Dominic. You know what Rome said? Okay. The third one was the establishment of women's religious orders in the 19th century. And we know those really were established as ministerial entities, teaching, nursing, care for the poor. Rome didn't like that either. Okay. The fourth great wave, Ed says, is lay ecclesial ministry. And it's beyond the United States. I mean, it is in the church worldwide. And, we won't talk about what Rome says. The bishops have said it is a gift of the Spirit. Yes? The one that they're using in the document is those people that are in stable, recognized ministerial positions that have been authorized and put forward. So lay ecclesial ministry is basically lay people in church ministry, whether it's religious education, youth ministry, pastoral associate, parish life director. It's the stable or recognized roles within the church. Okay. You know, sometimes you get used to saying these words and forget that we haven't all heard them. And I would say you are a lay minister then. And this is a struggle that the bishops had with this document, and they had to make a decision. So the document was written to help bishops understand how to prepare people who are going to be employed in the parish, who are going to take on roles that they had to be accountable for and trained for. And they named that group of people ecclesial ministers. But the truth is, by our baptism, we are all called to minister to one another. Some of us ordained, some of us lay. We're all disciples. So yes, we're all lay ministers. You throw that ecclesial, it means that those recognized employed positions, and that's the decision that they made with this document. Yes?
You said there were 18,000 plus parishes,
Yes.
31,000
Yes.
ecclesial ministers.
Yes.
That's two.
Yeah, you're doing the averaging. Yes, 2 point something per parish. Uh-huh. Well, that's because not every parish has them. So then that would be the average, but obviously it's not nicely spread out. So you have parishes with none, parishes, many with 1 or 2, and then some with very large staffs of 10 and 20. It really depends on the part of the country, and it depends on where there's resources. This is a very resource-rich part of the country. We have places for people to get education. We have many people available to do these roles. That's not true in an awful lot of places. Other questions? Yes.
If the parish has gone through the training process and has a plan,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the issues that surface in theory tends to work for the solution that surface. And my observation is that most parishes haven't, many parishes do not do that, so that slows it up.
That could be. Because it's not only 2 people collaborating that work towards a shared mission. The whole community, through a planning process, would be working towards a shared mission. Some of the places that have the clearest self-identity, a diocese that was down in a very, very Baptist Bible Belt, where there were very few Catholics, their vision was that they were a Catholic presence. And every parishioner and everybody involved down there knew that that was their role, simply to provide a Catholic presence in that place. Came out of strategic planning. They all knew it, and you could tell, you could experience it in parishioners as well as pastors and staff. So I would agree with your point. Okay? Now, I want to talk about pastors, and I want you to listen. I'm going to use different language. Cute guy, isn't he? I'm probably going to have to start using that because I didn't ask his permission, but he's in the Diocese of Richmond, and I was there last week. So there are 41,000 plus priests in the United States today. 27,000 that are diocesan, 13,000 that are religious. See if I can get the numbers here for you. Since the year 2000, there are 2,600 fewer diocesan priests and 1,600 fewer religious priests in this country. 70% are over the age of 55. Now let's think about that for just a second. If you have the luxury of retiring at 75, in 20 years, without the other end coming in, we're going to have 70% fewer priests in this country. Now, of those numbers, 25% are either retired or otherwise inactive and unavailable for pastoring. So that makes roughly, and I mostly just talk about diocesan priests, and I'll tell you why. That means roughly there's 21,000 diocesan priests available to be pastors currently in this country. Now, I told you how many parishes there were, 18,000. There's roughly 1 priest per parish in this country. But again, they're not spread out evenly. The diocese with the most parishes without a resident pastor, you want to try? It's cold, it's north. North Dakota. Over 80 parishes do not have a resident pastor in that diocese. I don't talk about the religious order priests simply because as their numbers are declining and their orders are changing, what I have been told to say is they are redefining themselves and reclaiming their charisms. We have been really gifted by religious orders that have held parishes in most of our dioceses. And we also know that they are pulling out of parish ministry in large numbers in many of our dioceses. Parishes that were held by an order for 100, 150 years now do not have a pastor or pastors available to them. The statistics seem to say that about 50% are at least involved as sacramental supply, as sacramental ministers. I have no way of, I don't have statistics to deal with that. We can say with surety that if you are a diocesan priest, you will pastor. We didn't used to say that. Now, we can say with absolute certainty that if you are a diocesan priest, there's a good chance you're going to pastor multiple parishes at the same time and probably have a diocesan position and a school chaplaincy and a hospital chaplaincy. I no longer, when I meet a pastor, say, "Oh, what's your parish?" I don't. I say, "What do you do?" "Well, I have this parish and this parish and this parish, and I administer this parish, and I'm doing the interfaith community." And this is a very different way that men are moving into pastoring than they used to. It's an enormously physical challenge that I think we as a church need to look at. But now I want you to hear how both lay and ordained talked about the pastoring role. Oh, wait a minute. I'm going to tell you something real quick first. We did do an extensive study of the Canon 517.2 parishes, parish life coordinators. 2/3 of the diocese have parish life coordinators. One of many different titles is, I can't be schizophrenic, so it's the one I use, but it's the person that the bishop installs to lead the parish. This is very different than a person hired by the pastor and then is the one left as the pastoral presence. The difference is pretty clear. One is answerable to the pastor, the other is answerable to the bishop. If you're installed under Canon 517.2, you can call together the finance council, the pastoral council, the things that pastors do. The study has been fascinating. The number seems to have peaked and is beginning to recede a little bit. We did do focus groups with over 50 bishops to ask them about their use of Canon 517.2 in their parish. And I'll give you the generic response. This is pre-publication, so I'll let you in on a secret. It pretty much was, "I'm really worried about this. I don't think we should do this. We need pastors. I really think this is a bad idea." Remember, this is deacons, religious or lay persons. But the parish life coordinators in my diocese, they're great. Let me tell you about them. So it's the people with faces and biographies and track records who are being successful. That's what we need. When it's an abstract thing, and I think we rightly should question it. Because it helps us not look at some of the bigger issues. But where there are parish life coordinators, and we've called them together, we've met with them, they're vital, they're alive, they're usually in the smaller or more rural parishes, but not always. Met one woman in her late 30s who was pastoring 2 parishes out in California, 3,500 families and 1,500 families. Another woman religious who had, 3 or 4 that she was merging, a total of 6,000 or 7,000 families. So it's not necessarily the smaller parishes, but, okay, now to the point. Whoops. This is what people, lay and ordained, told us was the role of the pastor, the one pastoring. It might be a parish life coordinator. They are the facilitators, the overseers. Think of the scriptural meaning of that word. They are consultative, collaborative, and call forth the gifts of others. They are the gatekeepers and change agent for new roles, structures, and programs. Now think about your own ministry or the ministry that your pastor does. This is very different language than I would have used 40 years ago. And it's very different language than I was using a minute ago when I was talking about the lay ecclesial ministers. So what I see happening across the board is an evolution of these roles. We're evolving these roles. So pastors are evolving into this overseer role, this gatekeeper role. And it makes sense if he's got 3 or 4 parishes or a mega parish. And what's important is the role of the pastor is critical. It might be less hands-on, it might look different than it used to, it might feel different, it might seem different, but it is absolutely critical to the life of the faith community. Because obviously this is the sacramental ministry, that to which we are called. And so what feels sometimes uncomfortable is in fact critically important in the life of the community. Yes. Our seminaries training people for this style of leadership? I think the answer is probably not. But I think the reason I'm saying that is the seminaries are not focusing on leadership. They're focusing on training for theology and priesthood. And say that it's, some say, not across the board, that their role is not to provide pastors, not to train people to be pastors. It's a real tricky thing. And if that's true, then whose role is it? I mean, everybody's going to pastor if you're ordained. Yes? That was the first half, okay. Well, there's a lot of research about it. Probably, yes. Well, I hope Emerging Models is calling people to look at that. I mean, it's critically important. And this, I believe, is how the Spirit is moving us. People are. Is there a formal movement? I doubt it. Yes. Well, there's many answers. There's many answers. And the project is looking at those that we can do in the church today. So we're not looking at the other answers. There are lots of options out there. You see, I think there's good news in what we are doing today, but it's going to invite us to a deeper look. Yes? I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. That's terrific. I mean, I think that's where it happens. It happens at home. And I don't know the answer to your question. I mean, I can't speak to that. Yes? You know, isn't that interesting? That's a question I've been asking. these answers came, what's missing is sacramental ministry. It is very clear that that is the role and the important role of the priest in the parish. And we say it, we talk about being a Eucharistic community. When we ask the question, what is the leadership role of the one pastoring? Almost nobody said anything about sacramental, spiritual, or liturgical leadership. And I don't know why. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So how do we assist people to understand that the leadership that is called for by the pastor by many ecclesial ministers involves more than just financial management, buildings,
Right. Mm-hmm.
but then there is an element that must run through all of that. That is spiritual,
Mm-hmm.
sacramental, and faith-based.
I've pondered this a lot because I think it is in fact that. I think we're not careful with our language so much. And I think that question I just told you immediately followed a series of questions where people talked in glowing terms about the spiritual life of the community is good liturgy and good spirituality. So in context, we were in context. I don't think we equate I think we equate leadership with business models. And that might be why. I remember one priest telling me, well, for a while it was not cool to talk about spiritual leadership, so we didn't talk about it. I don't know the answer. Because I think the spiritual, the sacramental leadership of the pastor is critical. And I think every pastor would tell you that. Well, we could have done that. Mm-hmm. I don't know. And if we had done that, what answers would we have gotten? And what is the spiritual leadership of the staff? And what is the spiritual leadership of the parishioners? It would be fascinating. Yes? These came from over 1,000 lay and ordained leaders from 2/3 of the dioceses in this country. About 30% were ordained. The rest were lay, almost all involved in either diocesan or parish ministry. 50-50 men and women, mostly well-educated. I think that's really possible. But let this just make us call to mind what is important to us. And how do we talk about that role? Remember the slide that I had before, that the parish is a dynamic event of the risen Christ. We are a sacramental church. I mean, I'm just telling you what the research said, but I think it really gives us a lot to think about. More questions before I move on? We did a survey of the next generation of pastoral leaders. We did an online survey, got over 1,300 responses, which we divided into two pools. One came out of colleges, both secular and Catholic. One came out of diocesan lists. Across the country, we looked for active young adults, so not just a general population survey. We've done focus groups, interviews. We asked them about their interest in ministry. It was not, we didn't use vocational language at all. Are you interested in ministry as a lay ecclesial ministry? Are you interested in ministry as an ordained? Are you interested in ministry as a religious or a deacon? The results are absolutely fascinating. We're getting ready to release the first part of the study. These young people told us half of them told us at one point they seriously considered lay ecclesial ministry. Between 30 and 40% of them told us, of the young men, told us they had seriously considered priesthood. Now, we know for a fact that less than 1% of the Catholic male population goes into the seminary, much less goes all the way through to ordination. So the question we wanted to know is, what happened between here and here? So we asked them about both lay ecclesial ministry and ordained ministry or religious. What are the attractors and what are the detractors? Across the board, the primary attractor is a call from God. Young people are seeing both lay ecclesial ministry and ordained ministry or religious life as vocational. The second highest, which I think is fascinating, for lay ecclesial ministry is a desire to pass on the faith. For ordained ministry is a desire to help people. A very small percentage said to be the sacramental presider, which is interesting because that seems to be more, the younger men that are being ordained are really very focused on that. The detractors are not a big surprise. Against priesthood, want to get married and have a family. For lay ministry, I can't support a family on that money. Number one in each case. But the second one is intriguing to me. Doesn't match my gifts, doesn't match my education. This is where I think we as a church needs to get our act together. Educational ministry, nursing ministry, medical ministry, all of those different gifts are part of ministry. But we have not communicated that to the young adults. They have asked us very clearly, pay attention to us. Do more for and with young adults in the parish. For heaven's sakes, hand them your website. Do you have an active or a static website? Give it to your young adults. They will have a wonderful time with it. If you want to reach your young adults, you better get cyber savvy. Young adults have told us, you get an hour on Sunday, and you better be the best game in town, or you don't get us. There is a new book out called Googling God. Do you know that lots of people, including some bishops, put homilies on the website so they can be downloaded into iPods so they can be listened while people are driving to work? Now, it better be a good homily. Young adults are telling us, you want to find us, you get on the internet. You go out into cyberspace. You find out about MySpace and Facebook and all of the places where young adults have created virtual communities. The second thing they told us is, and it was interesting, they split 50-50 between words that describe themselves as liberal or conservative. But no matter which way they went, a deep call for catechesis. Deep heart cry for catechesis and knowledge about their faith. These are young adults in their 20s and 30s, not the teenagers. So for what it's worth, I give that to you. But I will give you my favorite quote. A young woman said, we have to get back to the tradition of the church. We have to get back to the magisterium. We have to teach Vatican II. Just in case you didn't know that. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, part of it is the definition, because the question is there any movement on why the bishops are uncomfortable with the word vocation for lay ministry? Well, part of the reason for that is it was used in a static sense to define a state of life. And it's not being used that way when you talk about lay ecclesial ministry, although some of us would disagree with that. I think ministry is a way of life. So it's like, how do you compare apples and oranges? I mean, they really are struggling with it. Yes. I can't hear. Mm-hmm. 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 Well, there's lots and lots of conversation about that. There is. Yeah. Well, this is what folks told us is the future of parish leadership. Collaborative, team-oriented leadership. Leading and sharing ministry in clustered parishes and small faith communities. Increased dependency on the leadership of lay ecclesial ministers, deacons, parishioners, and lay-led communities. And there are communities that have neither staff nor resident pastor. And parish council chairs are simply stepping into that role. And recognition that ministry is rooted in discipleship. We are rapidly running out of time, so rather than go into the last section, I want to know if any of this is resonating with your experience. This is what you're doing? Okay. Pardon? Mm-hmm. That's right. It's quite simple. And I have a growing suspicion that if we stop thinking about it in terms of personnel-driven, people-driven, and move towards invitation of spirit, it might be very intriguing. How else is it resonating with your experience?
This resonates with my experience very much, but the whole thing that's missing here is the question of ordination.
In what way?
Well, having priests with multiple parishes is like, you almost present it as if it's a good thing. I mean, it's a thing for burnout. And how can you be a collaborative leader and call forth people if you're running 3 or 4 parishes? You wouldn't even know who the people were. I mean, there's a whole piece missing here, and it's the question of ordination. And, of course, the question of the ordination of women.
Right.
Completely bracketed. You've not used that phrase one time.
And the reason is that we haven't done research on it. I'm reporting out our research. That is out there as a possibility. Our current replacement rate, ordination replacement rate, is 1/3. You know,
so what does that mean?
The number is going down and down. In 20 years, we will have 12,000 men available to pastor our 18,000 parishes. To your point, I'm not presenting multiple, if I didn't mean to present multiple parish ministry as a good thing. Looking at possible new models of pastoring, that's where I think there's some invitation. I think we're being called as a church to a number of things in this process. Ordination is one. And I don't think we can project more than 5 years out because we have such a growing Spanish-speaking population that we really don't know who's going to go into the seminaries in 10 or 20 years. So diversity might change this conversation. What we mean about ourselves as a Eucharistic people, and who ministers to whom, and what is discipleship. It's sort of like if one muscle has been used a lot because your other arm is broken, and this arm starts getting better, this one feels like it's being underused, but really, are we moving into some kind of a new relationship here that finds all parts of this ministry and community critical? I can only pose the questions. I do not have the answers.
And you'll be a Eucharistic community without the celebration of the Eucharist?
That is the question.
I think it's a real question.
And does it have to be in each parish, or, you know, if it gets celebrated once in the state? Huge questions. Huge and important questions. And I don't know whether our theologians and the people that think about these things are taking this on, but I think it's critically important. Yes?
Studies. 1/3 of the Catholics are attending church, and an age distribution would probably be representative of the people in this room. That's another major indication.
They are doing other studies on young adults in church attendance, and their whole relationship to church is simply different than boomers or our parents. The motivation to go to church, the belief that you can be a very good Catholic without going regularly, the whole understanding of contributing financially to church, the difference in the immigrant populations, we don't know. I mean, it's huge. Yes?
You just use the image of a new relationship or a developing relationship, and in any new or developing relationship, it's always, well, what's going to be the next step, or can we take that next step? And I think that's where the hesitations come. What I'm seeing here is making sense, but I'm also seeing people that are trying these in places. And
Absolutely.
so it is coming.
They're trying it a lot. And people that feel some freedom to be creative in their own local setting, what I've come to appreciate, I'm learning, is that there is way more latitude in canon law for how we put this together than we've thought, because we are so used to the one priest, one parish model. And while that's still about half of our parishes in this country, there's much more latitude for other ways of doing parish life. Yes?
Vatican about the Pope saying about that our church, the Catholic Church, is a true church that Jesus has established on earth, which is because we have the fullness of the sacraments. And what distinguishes us from other churches is that they don't have all the sacraments that we have. And so whatever we do with the ministry, the helping the priest, we always need them to end up and wrap up all that we do. Faith, ministry, prayer, devotion, whatever we do. All the time. And then what we have noticed later. So what should we do in order to be able to perform sacraments? Will we be able one day, we women, become priests, doing something so that we keep on continuing and growing in faith and being really disciples of Jesus as we first started at the beginning of the church.
There's certainly much conversation about that. And other models that nobody's even talked about in here yet. But let's keep in our hearts that we are a sacramental church. I mean, I don't have the answers. I think there's much more we can do now and not throw up our hands and wait until the law changes, which is part of my message. Yes?
Is there any talk that vocation for priesthood is not a diocesan property, but is a national property?
I've not heard it. And we haven't actually done that research. So, and one more question? Yes. The Pastoral Summit. Oh, I would love to. Thank you for that wonderful segue. In April, we are hosting the first ever National Ministry Summit. It is being hosted by the 6 partner organizations in place of their annual meeting for the year 2008. It's not your typical conference. You're not going to come hear the experts speak, although I'm one of the keynoters. You're not going to come and sit and listen and get to choose from a lot of different workshops. The summit is actually focused around a core of 6 action groups or action tracks. You'll choose one to go in, and they're based on these different areas of research that I've been talking about, supported by keynote speakers. looking at the theology, what change means. And in the process, we hope to together collect the wisdom of the people attending, and I expect there to be at least 1,000 people there, about where we need to go, where the future of leadership, what recommendations can we develop as a community. So there will be a whole process of inviting ideas, culling ideas, voting on ideas, so that it will be a very interactive. Bishop Supich, who is the advisor to the project, says, get people to understand this is an event in the life of this church in America right now, a must-be place, because we need to let our voices be heard. The project partners made the decision that we would look at research and possibilities that are within the realm of the doable right now. But within that realm, there's a lot more to do than we, until our cages get shaken, realize that we can do. So it's in Orlando, Florida. Registration opens on Monday. I may work all weekend to get that website up. It is opening on Monday. The brochure is now online, and you can request hard copies of the brochure. Registration is online. I would suggest you register early. If you are a member of one of the 6 partner organizations, you'll get a $200 scholarship towards the registration. So for you, as a member, it will cost $250, which I think is a very good deal. If you're not, it only costs $450. You can join one of the organizations now and get the scholarship. And that's all part of the registration packet. So whether you're a pastoral planner or a lay minister or support lay ministry, yes? The next steps are, the website will continue, and we will continue to get as much of this data available to you. Loyola Press is publishing a series of books, 5 or 6 books on the research. The first one is in the printing presses now, will be available this winter and at the summit. It is an incredible collection, the stories of 20 people we met along the way that collectively tell this new story that we're telling, plus some commentary. Bishop Supich in the preface says, what we are witnessing, like Luke Acts, is the Acts of the Church in the United States. So that's the first book that's coming out. The project would love to get a renewal grant to continue the research, so prayers are in order. We're in the process of writing the proposal. Okay, other questions? I think we're at the end of our time. There's never enough time, and I talked too much and I didn't get everything done. Go to the website. Think about coming to the summit. Everybody is welcome, and thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you, Marty.